This is Big Man Tyrone, and you're about to watch the MtG Cabal cast with your hosts, Woad, Thirsty, and Reptile. Sub to us on all your podcast networks at MtG Cabal Cast and YouTube.
All right, well, welcome to this week's episode of the Cabal Cast, guys. Kind of a down week for us, so we're going to cover some general stuff as well as the big financial announcement, which is the Challenger decks. So what it means for finance, comparison of 2018 to 2019, a little bit of information on that. And then we're actually going to cover something that was brought up in the MTG Finance Central Facebook group, where a user there asked, what's your mode of operation? You know, basically, when you take 50 of a bunch of cards or 100 of one, what makes that choice? So basically going tall versus going wide, and what each of us individually do by that. And then, of course, we'll have picks at the end. So let's get started.
Yep. So we had the 2019 Challenger decks spoiled last week, and much to everybody's delight, there are some very high-profile reprints in here. And also, much like the 2018 version of the Challenger decks, there are some notable absences and some odd quantity issues. And what we're looking at, and I'll bring it up real quick because this list is, it's all the decks, is basically the mono-white aggro deck in all its glory from the Pro Tour, short some of the rares. Like you'll notice there are only 2 History of Benalias. We have the mono-red deck, which is short the Rekindling Phoenixes. Otherwise, the deck is pretty much the same. Experimental Frenzy at 2 feels right for the deck as a whole. You don't need the 4 really, despite the fact that that was kind of the de facto play pattern for the Star City event this past weekend. Deadly Discovery is the Golgari deck in some form. It's kind of a mishmash of cards between the Control deck, the Explore deck, and every other version. Of note, the J-Light Ranger count is 2 here instead of, I think, 4 usually in the main. Yeah. And they gave you 2 find finalities to go with that.
And no Vivian.
No. No Vivian, just 1 Vraska Relic Seeker. The Ixalan Planeswalker. Boop, which is cute. Then we have the deck that most people have been clamoring for, the Arcane Tempo deck, which contains 1 solitary Arclight Phoenix, and among that, the 2 Niv Mizzets and 4 Crackling Drakes that you can expect in some awkward version of this deck. But this deck is pretty much the premier of the 4, much like the Vehicles deck was of the 2018 set.
2 Chandras.
Yes.
Although...
And the Hazarets.
Yeah, and the Hazarets. It's very interesting to me, the difference between the Mythics.
Oh, yes.
I think it was Evan Irwin, I think we have that tweet.
Yep, I've got it.
Where he basically tweeted the comparison between the 2. And it was 2018, there were 21.75 rares per and 3 Mythics per deck on average. And in 2019, it was 9.5 rares per and 1.25 Mythics per.
Yes.
And I understand, and a lot of people raise this point, and they're right. A lot of those decks, especially the mono white one, had a bunch of little commons and uncommons that made the deck tick.
Oh, yeah.
I get that. I understand that's going to be a little bit higher. But they also, there's no 4X Legion's Landing in any deck. That's rotating soon and would be a great inclusion.
Yes.
There's, again, no Vivian, which she is also rotating soon. So why would you not include that? And there's no Vraska's Contempts anywhere.
Yeah. And we also have this weird set of decks where we have 2 aggressive decks, 1 pseudo tempo combo deck in the way they've built it, and then the mono red deck, which is the Golgari deck, which is, like I said, this kind of mishmash deck.
Yeah.
And 2018 decks were a lot more clear cut, and I've got that list, and I'll put that up on screen now. And you had Hazoret Aggro, which is the mono red deck, and you had 1 Chandra, like we mentioned, and 1 Hazoret. We had the vehicle deck, the Mardu vehicle deck, which contained the Heart of Chiron, which basically tanked that card.
4
yeah. Summer, 4 Heart of Chiron, which basically tanked that card from like $30. a random mono blue deck that didn't exist in the format at all with Kefnet.
Yeah.
Sorry, not mono blue. Second Sun Control, which was a deck that wasn't played. And then Counter Surge, which was the green-black deck, the Winding Constrictor deck, that was so far removed from the format. It was ridiculous, just like the Second Sun deck. But they had to reach back that far to get 4 reliable decks. The Approach the Sun deck is kind of a version of the deck that was played much earlier in the format. It had been in various colors, blue-white being the base, but that deck hadn't been heard from in like the last 2 Pro Tours prior to those decks being released.
Yeah.
And you're able to see the disparity here. Like you're seeing high-profile cards. There are gods in 2 or 3 of these lists.
Yeah.
And a Planeswalker in most of them. Here we have no Planeswalkers in any of these decks. Oh, we have 1 Vraska. Woo! Among the list. And we are only seeing maybe 1 high-profile card, 1 standard high-profile card in each deck compared to 3, 4, 5, depending on the deck. Yeah. Just not even count, just in terms of, not overall quantity, just count of uniques, right?
Yeah. The other big miss for me, and this is, I think, the biggest one, Jeskai existed there, and Jeskai had to ferry, and he's about to rotate. He rotates with M19 and everything else. So like 3, 4, 6 months away, whatever it is. At any rate, that card is now at the lowest point it has ever been, and it still sees play in Modern, Legacy, and Vintage. This would be their opportunity to put this card into people's hands, which Dom is just now out of print. So distros have what they have, and that's it.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And this was the opportunity to get it out there. And at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if it goes up at rotation. I don't think, with it not being in this deck, there's any chance that in a year it's less than $80.
Yeah. So they ran into a problem in 2018 where people were basically just buying the Mardu vehicle deck because it was the best value in comparison. It was also the most easily played deck. It was basically the Pro Tour version, I think, minus a couple uncommons and plus Depala. That card hadn't seen play at a Pro Tour since whatever set it was Depala was in was released. It was very easy to translate over. None of these decks really translate over into Standard because they would just blow the doors off these things in regards to the financial value contained within. 4 copies of Phoenix immediately makes that deck worth well over $100. But it also tanks the value of Phoenix a lot faster that way. So it's a double-edged sword. By not giving up the equity to the players to play that card, they gave up a little more equity to the secondary market, which is kind of weird, by keeping the population of that card down. Artificially odd. And then, like you said, they took a swing at this again, and they did miss a little bit, but not this time by having to reach back into the past for viable decks, but by not actually choosing other decks that can be represented in the format that probably should have been. Yeah. Do we need 3 aggro decks or 2.5 aggro decks and then 1 combo deck? No. There were control decks at the Pro Tour, and you don't have to be Shota to play Grixis Control, or I think it's Shota.
Yeah, Shota always plays Grixis.
Yeah.
I mean, there was, and when they announced what Pro Tour they were going for, I was like, oh, well, that was the mono red or Boros Pro Tour. But then I looked at top 8 and top 16. I'm like, oh wait, no, there was Golgari, there was Boros, there was mono red, there was mono white, and there was the Jeskai list that had Teferi, Expansion Explosion, and was in the stems. And when they made that announcement, my first thought was, oh man, this is great. We're getting Teferi.
Yeah. Why not?
Teferi's going to be in this deck. I can hold off on buying any if I need any, because it's an obvious reprint in these decks if they have half a brain.
Yeah. And
that was my mistake, because yet again I assumed WotC had half a brain.
Oh yeah, definitely. And with the Jeskai deck, it's weird. If you look at Evan's tweet, and we brought it up, like 1.25 mythics per this year compared to 3. If they would have taken the Jeskai deck, that immediately blows that number of mythics up by at least double. Because you need Search for Escanta and you need Teferi in those decks, right?
Yeah.
And what are you going to do? Put one of each in there, and then you have nothing else left for your deck? It's just a handful of rares that might also work. Like, it just doesn't make sense. They should have upped everything, kept it with the 2018 levels, and offered more cards in these decks to make Standard more viable for people to play in Paper. It's not like they're really gaining any new players for Paper Standard because of Arena, and you're not giving people the opportunity to play Standard, even if it's for a shorter amount of time. And you can look at this as WotC throwing people a bone and saying, here you go, here's some Standard cards, enjoy, have fun. But this is kind of along the lines of what Konami does with Yu-Gi-Oh! And when it comes to tins. Cards come out, they're worth infinite. Konami does not like the fact that any of their cards sell for over $100. There used to be, I think there still are rules on the floor of Champs, Yu-Gi-Oh! Champs, that you cannot sell a singular card for more than $100, so dealers have to bundle multiple cards together to sell them for more than $100, right? That's how the secondary market works for Yu-Gi-Oh! But in about 3 months, all those cards are put in a tin, X3, because that's a playset, and they are worth dirt. Everybody can buy infinite tins, they're worth nothing. And if WotC wants to do that with Standard, this is the opportunity, but they just keep not taking that shot.
Yeah.
These cards have 5 to 6 months to live in Standard, and then they just time out. Why not? Why not?
There's every reason to do it, and yet again, just dropping the ball, down it goes.
So, right? And with the increased population of these cards, you will see price depression, which is the big question. Like, what happens to Phoenix? Well, it's a 1X, so you need to spend $120 because MSRP on these is $30, right?
Yeah.
Which is basically the price of a Phoenix to buy 4 of that deck to play the card. And that's kind of equivalent exchange there. You're not paying less for 4 Phoenixes, but the population will increase, so it will go down over time. A good chunk of Standard rotates out. Phoenix may not be better. It goes down in price. You see a Faithless Looting banned or something else that's in that deck banned in Modern, then Phoenix drops even before these come out. WotC can control the price of that card if they really want to by playing with Modern instead of waiting for PT London.
Yeah.
But I'm not asserting WotC controls any form, the price of cards, by toying with the ban restricted list of any format. You can look at Vintage and the fact that Workshop has yet to be done in at all. They just keep letting it ride. WotC doesn't play with formats like that. But if they really cared about the fact that Phoenix was just rampant in both of those formats, costing an arm and a leg, and they want to get it out there and make it more accessible, then they probably could have taken a harder look at that deck. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing, and I'll touch on this later about that deck, is that you've got your Phoenix, and you also have, 3 Sulfur Falls?
I believe so.
The most valuable check land
to date.
Even after the reprint. So that's going to be an interesting one to see what happens there, because like you said, you buy 4 of the deck, you get a playset of Phoenix for roughly the same price.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think about that.
You've also got 12 Sulfur Falls now.
Yeah.
So there's 12 more just out there.
Yeah, and
it's not like Woodland Cemetery, which was in that Modern event deck with Verdant Catacombs, because that was such a small print run, it didn't really do a whole lot.
No.
This is going to be out for a while.
Yeah.
I mean, 4, 5, 6 months after these decks came out, they were still in LGSs. They were still at distros. They still had that stuff sitting there.
Oh, yeah.
So there was an ample supply of it, and it wasn't like those decks weren't desirable. I mean, you had Chandras and Hazarets, which at the time, prior to printing, were $40-$50.
Yep, 40 for Chandra, 25-ish for Hazaret.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what comes of this.
Yeah.
I think it's a miss. I think it's a terrible product. I don't think their set design has been better. I don't think their product design has been.
I agree with that. I think if in regards to the Challenger decks and what they're doing, I think it's flawless execution, but I think the inside of that product is where you begin to see the cracks.
Yeah.
Like externally, you said we're releasing the 4 most popular decks from a recent Pro Tour or our version of them. Cool. But then they give you the stripped down version. Your car is effectively on cinder blocks. Enjoy driving it down the street. Kind of ham-fisted way to play this deck. It just doesn't work. But before we transition away from this, to go along with the 3 Sulfur Falls, there are also 2 Niv Mizzets in that deck. So if you're sitting on that card as a long-term hold, which is what I thought it would be, duck. Just if you want to make your profit.
Kingdom. Yeah.
Yep. If you want to make your profit now as opposed to like 3 years from now, out.
Yeah. Because it went from a 1-year hold to a 3 to 4 year hold now.
Yeah.
Which, that's the big financial, to me, that is the biggest financial fallout is Sulfur Falls and Niv Mizzet. Mm. The other cards in there weren't particularly strong outside of standard. Both of those cards have insane EDH demand and some modern.
Exactly.
And I think that those are going to be the biggest hits here. Yep. They're going to tank hard, especially Sulfur Falls will be $2.
Yeah.
If it's not already.
Yeah. So, as we move away from that to a question that was posed on MTG Finance, I want to bring up the actual series of questions for you guys, because it's a topic that we actually thought about. We wanted to bring up, and we tossed it out on Patreon before we actually saw this post. But how do we operate? Like we mentioned, how do we rank our specs based on do we rank our specs based on confidence level? The financial investment, what justifies our choice for spec as well as quantity, and anything we can do from there in regards to helping people determine what for them would be a good spec, or just in general what is or is not a good spec. And I'd like to start this one off because we were originally going to title it Going Tall versus Wide, and that's kind of what my notes are based on. And to me, that's kind of where specking is. It's not pumping and dumping. Same thing as shorting, if you want to think about it that way. I look at it as going wide or going tall over time. And it takes me a good while to figure out what I want to spec on, unless I just see something pop immediately. Expansion Explosion, I called on a Saturday morning, fairly early on. Todd Anderson was in round 2 of some standard event, and I just made a called shot on that. And that card is a great example of something I went tall on. It met my handful of criteria for something that I want to go tall on. And for me, it's pretty simple. The cards are obviously powerful, but they're either for EDH or they're sleepers in standard. And then to further define a sleeper in standard, it's cards that basically have a similar effect to something that took over a format. It was an all-star card in its format, or the effect was just incredibly powerful, or it's a value machine in EDH. So Expansion Explosion, most people are calling it, I shouldn't say everybody, Sphinx's Rev.
Yeah.
Right? But as people tested for standard and those videos went public, they didn't really believe in it. I got to watch in a weekend one, as well as everybody else who decided to just tune into Todd Anderson, that card crush. So for me,
it was insane.
I went in on it. At the time when I went in on it, the vendor I bought from had them for under 25 cents a piece. So I went infinite. I bought 100 and some odd that weekend because it was just that cheap. I did it with Sunbird's Invocation as well. I bought Channel Fireball out. I knew they would reload, and I bought them out again. All for under 25 cents. That is an example of a value machine in EDH, Sunbird Invocation. And those are 2 cards that I went tall on, very tall on. Then you have something like Bounty of Luxa, Temporal Trespass, and Panharmonicon, which when I moved in on those were all between $1 and $4 each. Bounty might have been cheaper. And because
we went in on Bounty at the same time, and it was around 75 cents.
And because those were closer to $1, I did not just go infinite on those. I probably went between 30 to 40 copies of each. I didn't count before the podcast. But for me, that helps me minimize my risk overall. I should be able to get out in time. Knowing these are longer holds, I should be able to get out somewhere around my investment rate. But to make any more profit than that, either the card just needs to pick up in popularity incredibly, or it just needs to start spiking something. But I'm fine sitting on these for a while with the quantity that I bought in on, because 30 to 40 is easy to move to a regular vendor that has need for them. I can bring all 30 to a GP and probably move all my bounty of Luxus between 2 vendors if they were to ever pop.
Oh yeah,
not
for
hard,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
And they represented safe investments for long-term growth compared to the standard-based specs and expansion explosion, and some of the other things I moved in on for standard. What's her name? She's sitting right here. Linvala. Not Linvala.
Oh yeah.
Lavinia.
Lavinia, yeah.
Yeah. And Niv Mizzet, which you guys have heard me talk about, both of them. They represented kind of going infinite, waiting for a quick pop, and then just outing them, not to vendors because I went so tall on them. This is going to be Facebook, this is going to be TCG player, and then the remainder will go to vendors on site.
Yeah.
So for me, that's going tall. That's my methodology.
So for me, I'm pretty similar. One of the things that the main difference between you and I is that I am exclusively what is a good effect for EDH, because I've said multiple times on this podcast, and anyone who knows me, I've said it in person. Casuals drive the market. So like when I picked Sarkhan's Unsealing in like episode 3 or 4, I'm still picking them up, even though the price has gone up from like 40 cents to 90 now, because it's one of those cards that like this is something that a red player in EDH they're gonna see. And they're going to be like, this card is insane. I need it.
Yep.
And that's the type of thing that, for me, when I go tall, it's almost exclusively a long-term hold. I very rarely pull a short. I did Expansion Explosion because you recommended it. There's a few times where, in the Cabal, we'll be like, all right, well, let's do Soldevi Excavations today.
Yep.
Great. Let me buy 40 of them.
Yep.
But generally, I look for the stuff that's, more of the EDH, something that Johnny is going to sit there and be like, this card is great. I didn't know it existed when they go through a $1 box. Mm-hmm. And then you check in a year and it's on 500,000 decks on EDH Rec. And you're like, oh, that's why this card is $5 now. No wonder. Like Ancestral Blade or whatever it is. Or, there's that uncommon in every Commander set that in a year is $10. That's the type of stuff that I go for personally. Yeah. I try to ignore standard. I typically, though, my threshold for infinite is $2.
Okay.
And that's mostly because of how long I'm fine holding.
Yeah.
And like my outs similar to you. It's oh great, I've got Facebook or whatever, like the Judge promo counter spells.
Yep, those guys.
I've been picking those up for 2 years now when they were $20, and then this weekend they popped up to like $110. So I threw them in a couple discords for like $50 to $70 a piece, $200 to $225 a set, and sold every single one.
Yeah.
Because I've just been sitting on them, and now it popped, so I'll get my margin and call it a day. Mm-hmm. And that's how I go tall. Going wide's a little bit different for me. So again, for me, shill baby shill. So I've been going very wide on middle school.
Yep.
So for example, we have Gerard's Verdicts, Foil Dismiss, and Phyrexian Furnace, the poor man's Tormod's Crypt for Reanimator hate. And on that stuff, I usually go about 10 to 20 of them.
Okay.
And it's very much, for me, an art rather than a science. So, like, old promos were something like I picked Lightning Greaves for FNM. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting at around 27 of them now. And that's probably where I'm going to stay. And it's one of those things that, like, okay, so what are some things that have been targeted for buyouts in the past? APAC lands, EPAC lands, FNM Sarah Angel, like all these old promos. So let's grab one of those that has a good effect that is a reasonable target for a buyout. Or my other one, God bless his soul, the Saffron Olive effect. So when Solemnity got spoiled, I even posted in the Discord. I was like, hey guys, Snow Gorger, Phyrexian Snow Gorger foils, get them now.
That's right, I remember.
Never popped. That's fine. That's why I only went for like, I think it was 12 that I ended up with, because
the Cold Snap card, right?
Yeah, it's a foil from Cold Snap. That card's never going to be worth less than what it is now.
No.
So I thought it was fairly safe, but I usually my riskier specs I tend to go tall on. My safer ones, I go wide on. The ones where I'm not as likely to lose money.
Yeah. No. I actually I am very similar when it comes to going wide. But that's a mentality I share as well. But I have fallen into a trap set for me by Watsy. This is a good one.
Lich's Mastery.
Not that kind of trap. Different one. So, for me, when I go wide, I don't sit there and I'm not the kind of guy that reads the spoilers because I'm not grinding this game like for points. I play for fun. I play all foil Astral Slide. It looks good. I gotta say that.
Yeah.
I wait for a little while. First couple of weeks of Standard, I let the format settle and see where the cards look a little too pushed. After week 2 of Standard, once people have kind of settled into this is the aggro deck, this is the control deck, this is the mid-range deck, or decks there within, does anything look a little too pushed? Does anything look a little too good? And paying attention to older format, either forums in the case of Legacy looking for deck techs, rip the MTG Salvation boards for some reason. They're not deck techs, sorry, they're tournament reports. No, the reports. Those things are dead for whatever reason. And then
those are great.
Oh, they are. If you don't read the MTG Salvation boards at all, you should. The Legacy one is hilarious.
Yeah, it's amazing.
But the Modern and Legacy subreddits are also always really active around spoiler time. You can always kind of get ahead a little bit there.
Yeah.
So I look for these cards. And anything that looks a little too pushed, I'll move in low quantities. 8 to 16 generally past my normal 4. Unless it's something weird, like Scavenging Ooze, for instance, where that card was just ridiculous in Legacy and was available nowhere else.
Yeah.
Then they printed it in Standard all of a sudden, so I just went I got 30 or so. It's really it's one of the only ones that kind of breaks this mold.
Yeah.
And I just kind of focus in on those, especially trading, because people are really willing to get rid of those cards, and if I know they're going to hold value later on, I'll take them.
Yeah.
So Scavenging Ooze was a big one. I picked up a handful of non-foil M15 oozes, 2 or 3 foils, because this stuff is hard to move by me locally, and I wasn't really willing to do Facebook stuff yet, and infinite of the DOTP promos, because it has different art, and it's only available in foil, right? So it makes it really unique. But then I also went wide on things like Dig Through Time, Deathrite Shaman, Abrupt Decay, Rabble Master, like all in a row. Exactly. This is where I got hoisted by Watsy. And I played Blue-Black Control and Standard, so I knew how ridiculous Dig Through Time was. And this is before it hits Modern and Legacy at all. People haven't really put together the Jeskai Ascendancy deck, or Is It Delver, in Modern or Legacy. And it has yet to be restricted in Vintage. And for whatever reason, the card's like $1 to $3, so I just gobble them up, gobble.
Yeah.
And the same thing with Deathrite Shaman. After people here had their fill of Deathrite Shaman, and before it was banned in Modern, I was picking those things up for $2 to $3, just cash all the time. Easy, right? And then same thing with Abrupt Decays. People got their fill up here, and then I just started buying them out at a low entry price and just moving them. And Rabble Master. That one took a lot longer. But I was like, this card's good. It's a 4-drop. It's great in Legacy, where it'll just sit there and be in the... I assumed it was actually going to be in the... what do they call it? Not Shortcake, just the regular mono-red Painter Servant Grindstone deck.
Yeah.
Shortcake's the red-white one. Like, this goes in the sideboard. You want to transform into mono red prison. You got it. And then I was like, maybe Muddle update and it'll go somewhere else. So I've got a couple of those kicking around. And these are the cards that I just looked way too pushed for Standard. When you played them, they were just kind of game over spells, aside from Abrupt Decay. That was just... You read that card and you're like, why? You're just too good, man. Too good.
Yeah.
These were cards that just ran Standard, and it was obvious they were going to from the first month they existed.
Oh, for sure. So
instead of going really tall on one and exposing myself to cards getting banned, I went wide across.
Deathlight was fine.
Yeah. To be fair, Bloodbright Elf died for Deathrite Shaman's sins.
It did.
Nakadal died for somebody else's sins. Yeah.
Yeah.
Figure that one out. And so I focused on DRS and Abrupt Decay from Return to Rav, and I went up wide on those as I was picking up my first set of Shocklands because I didn't play originally, and then we moved into Theros block, and that set was crap. But I was picking up the gods. I picked up Infinite Gods for that entire block, not really going tall on them until they rotated, and then they just got wicked cheap. Then KTK comes out, and I went across the board on most of the delve spells and the fetches because they were. Yeah, the fetches were super liquid and they were super cheap for the first couple months. So I just went wide across all of that.
Yeah.
And not going, aside from, I think fetches might have been the only thing I went way tall on.
Yeah.
Because.
Well, it's similar to right now. I think we're similar to KTK. We've got Shocklands right now. Yeah. I am going wide and tall on Shocklands, and I highly suggest anyone watching this, listening, whatever, does the same.
Yes.
They're way too cheap. They will always be worth at least $5 a piece, and they're the most liquid cards in the game next to fetch lands.
Yep. And short of the price point, everything that you just said is why I went in on fetch lands immediately. It was convenient when I was judging pre-releases, and my now wife, then girlfriend, was able to just kind of wheel and deal. I told her, like, the KTK pre-releases we went to, I was like, no fetches, don't pick anything up. And then 2 weeks later at an F&M, I make a deal with some guy. I walk out, and I just hand the man a bunch of money, and I take infinite fetch lands. And she's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Don't worry, they dropped. We're good." I just walked away with like 30 fetch lands. I'm like, "Deal, we're in." And that was it. From there, just everything went up. I sat on them forever, trading them out here and there. And those are the kind of things. It becomes really evident within the first month or so what cards you can go wide on because you're going to cast a net that exposes you to very little risk. You should be able to trade these cards out at your entry price in a couple of months if you have to, or a couple of weeks if you have to. They represent fairly safe holds for the most part.
Yeah.
Unless you get got by WotC.
Terrible. Smuggler's Copter. Come on, that card was great.
That is actually a card I went tall on.
Same. Copter and Ferocidon. Actually, I didn't go tall on Ferocidon until after the ban, and I still think it's a great pickup right now.
It is too. You don't have a lot of permanent base can't gain life effects in Modern for the burn deck, and it is one.
Yeah, I mean, until we get Pyrostatic Pillar and Price of Progress and all those other ridiculous cards people are sure are going to be in Modern Horizons. I've already posted it in Sick Deals, but I'll say it here too. You can watch it here on the podcast. Sub on YouTube, it'll happen. If Force of Will is printed in Modern Horizons, I will eat the original sketch for Mountain Goat and this albino Mountain Goat on camera.
I don't want to say we're rooting for it, but we have a little skin in the game now.
Yeah, right.
No. My hot take on red cards coming back is Chain Lightning, but that's neither here nor there. I think it's a fine card, because if I want to Chain Lightning you, you're most likely going to be able to chain my ass back. So it's a fair and balanced Magic card.
Yeah.
It's Modern. Everybody plays red.
Yeah.
But that's me going wide. And like I said, I generally, when I want to go wide, I take those couple of weeks and I look at what's happening in Standard. And that is very overt, because you have the Star City Tour that now starts on release weekend with Standard.
Yep.
So you have a day 0 format, which is mainly going to be aggressive. Then you get like I said, about 2 weeks from there, and the format shakes out a little bit. And you can begin to see what's going to take over, what the format will solidify in, and where you want to go in regards to going wide and casting the largest net. And this is great for just kind of a nice, smooth income stream in regards to Standard cards over the next couple of months. If you just go wide in a quantity that works for you, like I said, I'm usually 8 to 16, maybe 20 past my personal playset. Yeah. And then you can just roll it. It works really well for trading too. Those cards are always going to be in high demand, right? So you can always pick up more stuff and roll it.
Yeah. And
it comes down to a lot of times knowing yourself, your position, and your outs. And it's going to be the same every time. Thirsty and I have different outs. And we will forever. One of the things that I can't really do here, because my player base is kind of dwindling and a lot of my events are switching over to be sealed, is move those cards like I used to.
Yeah.
So I can surely trade for stuff that I can out later on, but I'm not going to be outing it to other players in my area. It's going to involve travel, or it's going to involve shipping, and those are both associated costs now with that card.
Yeah.
So I have to keep
Very
that
true.
in mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. But unless you have anything else you want to add to the wide section, I think we're good to move on to picks. But
Nope. I think we can move along to the picks.
I do want to bring one thing up from Cincy, something you mentioned while you were on site. Old border foils.
Yes.
They were
So, as I was going around vendors, because of course I was trying to pick up as many middle school foils as possible, because shill baby shill, I noticed that one, they didn't really exist. I think there was a playset of foil 7 sleight of hands that stayed throughout the entire weekend.
Mhm.
Other than that, most of the old border foils that were there, it was 2 factor fictions, 3 ops, and a standstill, as well as 2 dazes. That was it for the whole floor. I picked them up.
Mhm.
Also, nobody was selling. I went to, part of it could be prices, so I went to 4 different vendors with a foil 7th Underground River. I got offers from $15 to $55, and TCG low right now is like $150.
Jeez.
So it's an interesting time, because if you are someone who, like me, wants to be involved in middle school and you want to pimp your decks or have pimp for people that do, now's probably the time to get in, because you don't have to put a whole lot of money into it, because vendors are so unsure on this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, even Card Kingdom's buy list on some of these, which I watch religiously, has not moved in 2 months.
No.
Even though they've been out, and so has TCG. So there's a prime opportunity there for anyone looking to move in on that format.
And I think regardless of whether you're into foils or not, if you're thinking about moving to that format, the player-to-player interaction is going to cost you a little more awkwardly for once than the player-to-vendor interaction. Yeah. So, keep that in mind as you're perusing around.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's head into picks, and I want you to go first.
All right, so I touched on it a little bit earlier when I was mentioning the Challenger decks. I don't think you picked them up yet. I think you pick them up in about a month and a half to 2 months. Sulfur Falls. Mm-hmm. Quantity is going to explode. It's one of the most popular color combinations in EDH. It's a card that sees play in some decks in Modern, and it's a budget replacement, so to speak. But it's a card that is insanely liquid. Mm-hmm. I have an easier time personally trading Sulfur Falls than any of the other check lands. Everyone loves Izzet. Everyone loves dual lands. EDH players love this card because it's cheap and it produces 2 colors. It's the type of thing that if there is one person in your city that has the 54 stack or whatever it is, all the color combination commanders, they'll want it.
Oh, yeah.
It's also the type of thing that fills out trades nicely. If you're a little bit off on a trade, anyone who knows what they're doing will always pick up a land like Sulfur Falls or a Shock Land, because those cards trade out. They're insanely liquid. So once this card hits, sub $2, I think it's a perfect time to go tall and try to get, 30 to 40 of them. And try to, you can just gradually out them, only put about 4 to 6 in your binder at every time. Or if you post a sale post, pro tip, if you buy out a card, only post 4 in your sale post on Facebook and say you have a playset, because nobody knows when that playset sells. You just leave the thread up.
Yeah,
it's fine.
It's a Swish auction style.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's an incredibly good pickup in about a month and a half when these things drop, because it's so liquid, it will be so cheap, and it's a card that will go up, because very quickly, I know that price memory is a thing, but very quickly you're starting to see blue-red become the expensive land combination over blue-black.
Yeah.
Whereas traditionally, blue-black was always the most expensive land because those were the 2 best colors. That started to shift now, where you have higher demand for your Izzet rather than your Dimir.
Yep, I agree. And for people who are keen-eyed and noticed that earlier in the podcast history we have Sulfur Falls listed, it is not the same kind of issue that we had with Mox Opal. That pick was actually all of the check lands for Dominaria. I just couldn't. I didn't feel like putting 5 picks for one person. So I just chose Sulphur Falls because at the time it was the cheapest of those lands that wasn't.
Sun Petal.
No. You're thinking of the wrong cycle. The Clifftop Retreat.
Right. Yeah, Clifftop. Yeah.
Like, we thought that was just going to bust because we had no idea it was coming from Rev. So instead of making it that one, I made it Sulphur Falls because people play that color combination in Modern.
Yep.
So I'll take over now. My card for this week is unsurprising if you're in the Patreon. It is Chancellor of the Tangle. So I mentioned this card last week when we were talking about the London Mulligan, and the power level of this card for Modern is probably where it needs to be to make this a $3 to $5 card once people start experimenting a little more with Goryo's Vengeance and Goblin Charbelcher. While this card is not nearly as good as a Spirit Guide, Elvish, or Simian, the fact that this still allows you to turn one combo off cannot be overlooked. I also think that the Chancellor effect with the London Mulligan rule overall just gets a huge boon because of it, and we might see Annex rise, but that's for another day.
Yeah.
When I initially began looking at this card and kind of throwing the idea around, what I noticed was that the market price on this is about 40 cents, or was about 40 cents individually. Card Kingdom is buying it for 20. Like you can see here. I'll bring it up. Card Kingdom buy price, 20 cents. The foil price, however, I was able to buy them for cheaper than Card Kingdom is buying them. So there was immediate arbitrage opportunity, which generally to me means that this card is seeing demand behind the scenes, but TCG is just currently flooded.
Yep.
So it's very hard to keep an eye on the market.
Yep.
So moving in on non-foils or foils is up to you. If this card does pop because of the London Mulligan, like I think it will, I think it resurrects the Goryo's Vengeance deck because you can now combo off a turn earlier more reliably.
Yeah.
And it also enables Goblin Charbelcher a lot better than it did before. Then you, like I said, you'll see $3 to $5 copies of this normally, and the foil will probably be anywhere from maybe 15 to 20, 10 at the low end if it winds up that this deck is solidly either one of these is solidly tier 2, or people start playing Rest in Peace. One or the other.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I think you could see happen is, like, if the London Mulligan sticks, it's the type of thing that you could have see play in Legacy all of a sudden. Mm-hmm. Because it does enable those degenerate decks to go the extra mile.
Yeah.
They can now do these things that they couldn't before, where it's like, all right, well, this card was garbage before, but now with this Mulligan, it's another, versions 4 through 8 of some other card in the deck.
Yes.
And I think that's the type of thing that, for better or worse, if this Mulligan sticks, and I hate to say it, but, Watsy gonna Watsy, it probably will. It's going to have a huge impact, and I can see something like this taking over then, and not just Modern, which is the obvious place for it. So it's definitely something that I think is worth keeping an eye on.
Yeah. I think of the two Chancellors that will do anything because of this, Tangle, I believe, has the higher ceiling compared to Annex in regards to growth overall. Annex will obviously cost more, but it already costs more, so your percentage is concerned. The higher ceiling, I believe, is with Tangle.
Yeah.
But pre-game effects are going to be at a premium after the London Mulligan rule moves into effect. So, if you like the Chancellor pick, but you don't like Tangle, Annex is the way to go. If you don't like either of those, then you can look into any other pre-game effects like we've talked about. We've talked about ley lines. We've talked, blue ley line, black ley line, white ley line from Core Set, or something like Serum Powder, which has seen, I think, 1 or 2 printings, but is currently in limbo in regards to price.
Yeah.
Just because it's really weird with how you mulligan, but
yeah, it's been an interesting seeing how that plays out. And I know we'll get a little bit more detail after the Pro Tour. I'm going to call it that forever. Deal with it. I think it's, for once, it's a rule change that doesn't affect power level, that has very real implications for the financial side of the game.
Yeah.
And that's real weird to me. But I'm here for it.
Fair enough.
So,
we all are.
We'll see how it goes. Yeah, right. But, so that does it for us this week. You can, of course, find me at Thirsty Sizzler.
I am at Halt, I am Reptar. You can find us where?
At MtG Cabalcast on Twitter, YouTube, your podcast channels, as well as Patreon. And please do not forget to sub there. We still have our giveaway for a box of Uma going on. Once we reach 100 patrons, and it is as cheap as literally $1 a month, one lucky subscriber will get a box of UMA.
Yep. And this is not the only promotion that we will be running through Patreon. We plan to do this with many more sealed products.
Modern Horizons.
So, yeah. War of the Spork.
Yeah,
because that's what people care about.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys. We will catch you next week.
See you guys.